Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Mullenix. Have you done everything right in your life? Most likely, many will say yes. The lives of the figures in today's story resemble a madhouse. Since its inception, alcohol has remained the most commonly used psychoactive substance. It is not surprising that alcoholic drinks destroy families, destinies, and even lives. Barbara Mullenix was born on May 29, 1950, in Munich, Germany. She spent her childhood there and was described as an ordinary child from a family slightly above the middle class. By the age of 18, Barbara got married. She always dreamed of starting a family, but from the very beginning, it was far from ideal. In particular, the strong-willed Barbara turned out to be far from the ideal wife her boyfriend wanted. She was very hot-tempered. After that, she moved to the USA. In total, she went through 3 marriages, all of which ended in divorce. After her early relationships, Barbara had 2 sons, who had already left home by the time of that events. Only her 17-year-old daughter, Rachel, remained living with her. Rachel was born during Barbara's 3rd marriage to Bruce, a man who turned out to be 9 years younger than Barbara. The entire family settled in Oakland, Oklahoma, USA. Bruce was initially attracted to Barbara's vibrant personality, but just as quickly as it drew him in, it began to repel him. A typical cycle of Barbara's relationship problems began to repeat itself. Rachel, born in 1989, became a guiding star for Barbara, as she had always wanted to have a daughter. During this period, her daughter was treated like a princess, and she willingly took advantage of this. Rachel was given the largest bedroom, the best outfits, and extravagant parties for her birthdays. At a young age, she convinced her parents to enroll her in a special private school that required attendance only once a week, allowing her to enjoy a relatively easy life. Rachel was a good student, very athletic and active. She participated in inter-school basketball championships, attended ballet classes, and practiced gymnastics. However, despite all of this, her parents faced major problems. Barbara struggled with alcoholism for a long time, and after Rachel turned 10, her drinking became noticeably worse. According to Rachel's memories, Barbara became a severe alcoholic who verbally and physically attacked her husband and daughter whenever she drank. Once she touched a glass, she would become aggressive. She could grab them by the hair and hit them. This resulted in police being called to their home several times due to domestic violence. The first incident occurred in 2002 when the police found 12-year-old Rachel crying on the street, showing a bite mark allegedly left by her mother. The police reports indicated several bite marks on her back that the girl clearly could not have inflicted on herself. However, she later admitted that she made up the story and asked the authorities not to press charges against her mother. She probably didn't want Barbara to suffer. After such outbursts of aggression, Barbara would often apologize to her family members. When she wasn't drinking, even her ex-husbands described her as kind and sociable. However, all this changed radically once Barbara started drinking again. Her relationships with men fell apart for the same reasons, either due to her alcoholism or the aggression stemming from her difficult temperament. When Rachel turned 13, Bruce, tired of the situation, decided to end the marriage and moved to Newport Beach, California, in search of work. Barbara then decided to move to Tampa, Florida. Typical divorce proceedings soon arose. It was difficult for they to agree on many things. They didn't want to prolong the process. Ultimately, they suggested that their daughter choose with whom she wanted to stay. This was a difficult period for Reiki, as the answer to such questions became too much for her to handle. Her parents ended up in different states, making it difficult for her to visit either parent. In the end, Rachel chose to stay with her mother and moved to Tampa, and her father had to pay child support. This decision shocked Barbara's friends, who were aware of the addiction and believed that this story could not end well. Exactly, the first incidents of trouble soon followed. In 2004, the Tampa police received a call from the home where Barbara and Rachel lived. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they found a woman in tears. She was very nervous and shaking all over. There were injuries on her body, some of which she clearly could not have inflicted on herself. Barbara was reluctant to communicate with the police, answering questions in monosyllables, but from her words, it was clear that these injuries were inflicted by her daughter, Rachel. At the time of the police's arrival, the teenager had run away from home. One of the arriving officers called Rachel on her mobile phone. She immediately answered and admitted that there had been a quarrel with her mother before leaving. They had fought, and after that, Rachel hung up. In response to subsequent calls, she refused to answer. Ultimately, there was no formal complaint. Barbara refused to press charges against her daughter, and the case was hushed up. Incidents provoked earlier by Barbara in fits of alcoholic aggression ended in exactly the same way. During this period, Barbara continued to drink, and it seemed that the situation was worsening. She did not work, and they lived on benefits and alimony from Rachel's father, but there was clearly not enough money. By 2005, all this led to the fact that she could not pay the rent, which was high. When they were notified of this and given a day to pack, Rachel called her father in Newport Beach and asked if he could shelter her and her mother for a while until Barbara could recover from another binge and get back on her feet. Bruce doubted that contacting his ex-wife again was a good idea, but there was no other way out. Rachel was very convincing and used a trick. She told her father that if he could not shelter them both, they would be forced to look for other housing and would not go to him. Apparently, Bruce really wanted his daughter to come to him, so he agreed to these conditions. Rachel later admitted that she understood that without her, her mother would slide into a marginal lifestyle completely and have no way out. In the hope of saving her mother, she made this decision from the beginning. Barbara understood perfectly well that her ex-husband would be against it, so she was grateful to her daughter for her help. After receiving permission from Bruce, both packed their things and went to California. Newport Beach is now one of the richest and most prosperous communities in the United States, located south of Los Angeles. It has many beaches and premium real estate. Bruce owned an apartment there. In such areas, the crime rate is usually low, and violent attacks are committed extremely rarely, as criminal elements typically seek to profit. Unfortunately, with Barbara's arrival, the situation clearly became tense, which greatly upset Bruce. Despite the fact that the former spouses lived in separate rooms, they almost immediately began to quarrel. For Rachel, this move became an excellent opportunity to get to know the social life of the elite area of America. In any case, she and Barbara were focused on succeeding in the film industry to become famous. Barbara had already taken the first steps toward this dream. She got a job as an assistant on a set, actively attended castings, and made acquaintances. Everything went on as usual until May 2006, when the 17-year-old girl met a young man at a party. He was described as a quiet, athletic guy from a good family, good-natured and hardworking. During this period, he worked full-time, supported himself, was focused on his career and family. A romantic relationship quickly blossomed between them, and soon Rachel introduced him to her family. From the very beginning, the 4-year age difference worried both her mother and father, but after getting to know the young man better, they saw that their daughter had chosen a decent guy who treated her well. They hoped that Rachel would choose this good young man. However, Barbara soon began to exhibit flashes of jealousy. It seemed as though she felt offended by the guy because he was taking up all of Rachel's free time. Rachel practically no longer devoted herself to her relationship with her boyfriend and pushed her dreams about Hollywood into the background. Now, it became obvious that Rachel was not interested in work. Hormones had completely turned her head. Barbara continued to pursue her acting career and even landed a small role in the series CSI, Crime Scene Investigation. The character appeared in one of the episodes in a secondary role, and Barbara was waiting for new opportunities. Considering the age difference between the young couple, Rachel needed official permission from her parents to engage in a relationship with him. However, she was skilled at manipulating her mother and father, often giving them ultimatums. This is likely how she coerced them into signing a document granting their permission. From that point on, the couple could calmly meet. With the high school girl always having this permission to prevent her boyfriend from facing any legal issues regarding the corruption of minors, as specified by law. At the same time, Rachel managed to negotiate very favorable conditions for this agreement. The only stipulation was a curfew set at 1 a.m. However, as practice showed, even this became too serious a restriction for the rebellious Rachel. On August 31, 2006, Rachel accidentally fell asleep at her boyfriend's house and missed curfew. Barbara was furious. Unable to reach her daughter by phone, she went to Ian Allen's house at around 2 o'clock in the morning. Once there, she began knocking on the door, screaming and raising everyone's alarms. She forcibly pulled Rachel out of the house and forbade her from seeing Ian. This was shocking for Rachel, but for a while, Ian and Rachel decided to take a break. 10 days after this conflict, Rachel wrote in her diary that her relationship with her mother had deteriorated to its historical minimum. She openly called her mother a psychopath and reported that she heard threats from Barbara every day. Rachel expressed regret for not leaving for Tampa with her father back then and hoped that Barbara would calm down so that things could return to normal. However, things did not improve. On September 13, 2006, a yacht left Newport Harbor, and the captain noticed something suspicious in the water. He saw a large, tightly sealed cardboard box floating past the ship and thought to himself that it looked like a coffin. Pushing away dark thoughts, he pulled out the suspicious object only to discover the body of a woman wrapped in a bloody sheet. He reported this gruesome find to the Coast Guard. When police officers arrived on the scene, they counted 52 stab wounds to the face, neck, upper body, and back. The most disturbing detail was a knife sticking out of one eye, along with another smaller bloody knife wrapped in the same sheet, which still had remnants of the victim on it. A third knife was simply discarded in the box. All three were ordinary kitchen tools from the same set. The body was sent for an autopsy, where the medical examiner found that 2 of the numerous stab wounds were fatal, having cut the jugular vein and carotid artery. Each of these wounds could have killed the victim within minutes without immediate medical assistance, leaving no chance of survival. The examiner concluded that she had been killed on the evening of September 12, less than a day before the yacht owner's call. The victim remained unidentified until the medical examiner discovered breast implants, each assigned a serial number at the factory, which could be used similarly to dental records. This led the police to identify the victim as Barbara Mullenix. They quickly located the deceased. Detectives went to the house where Barbara lived with her daughter and ex-husband. When the investigators arrived, the house was empty. They began inspecting the territory, and by that time, Bruce had driven up to the house. He stated that he had been on a business trip for several days, about a 2-hour drive from home, and had returned less than an hour ago. According to him, he had not yet seen his daughter or ex-wife, as he had gone to the store for groceries upon his return and had not managed to contact them yet. He confirmed that both of their mobile phones were silent, which he found strange, but he didn't think much of it, assuming they were busy with their own affairs and would return home later. The detectives spoke with Bruce. They learned that he and Barbara had a rather complicated relationship. Despite being divorced, they had been living together again at their daughter's request. The atmosphere in the house was tense, particularly regarding Rachel's relationship with her boyfriend, which worried her parents. Bruce cited Barbara's alcohol addiction and violent behavior while intoxicated as the main reasons for their divorce. He also admitted that Barbara occasionally used illegal substances, further aggravating her behavior. Soon, Bruce became a prime suspect, as he had a possible motive and could have provoked the circumstances leading to the attack. Given that they were discussing a premeditated murder, it was highly probable that the killer should be sought within the victim's immediate environment. Authorities quickly noticed that Bruce did not seem very upset by the news of Barbara's death. He either skillfully concealed his feelings or, most likely, felt more empathy than negativity. Bruce cooperated with the investigation and allowed the apartment to be inspected. During the search of Barbara's bedroom, investigators found a small imprint on the wall that resembled a smeared trace of a bloody hand. In the kitchen, a bucket contained a sponge with suspicious dark spots and a latex glove. It was evident that the hallway had been cleaned. On the table, there was a knife set missing several items that were identical to those found with the victim. With all these facts in mind, suspicions against Bruce grew. The police arrested him and took him to the station for questioning. However, Bruce immediately provided an alibi that was easy to verify. He was indeed hundreds of kilometers away from the city at that time, which could be confirmed through motel records. At the same time, Bruce's colleagues stated that he was working with another client during the massacre. Bruce has been removed from the suspect list. Despite his quarrelsome nature, Bruce had no idea that Barbara might have mortal enemies capable of murder, especially since they had been living together. Rachel was now missing. The police wanted to talk to their daughter. During the inspection of the family's home, no signs of a break-in were found. However, serious concerns arose that Rachel, who had disappeared from all radar, was in danger. Attempts to contact her were unsuccessful. She ignored calls from relatives and law enforcement. Also, no ransom demands received. According to the neighbors, the last activity in the apartment was noticed several days prior. They also learned about Rachel's relationship with her older boyfriend, Ian Allen. Additionally, Bruce mentioned the problems that arose between Barbara and the young couple, including an incident when she took Rachel from Ian's house and forbade Rachel from seeing him. It's possible that Ian and Rachel want revenge on Barbara for interfering in their love affair. The police went to Ian's house to talk to him and find out Rachel's whereabouts. Their suspicions were quickly confirmed. Ian was also missing. His parents said that they had last seen him a few days ago, and since then, they were unable to reach him. They were very worried and were about to go to the police station to file a report about their son's disappearance. The police granted them permission to look around his room. Law enforcement took Ian's laptop for forensic examination. Shortly before his disappearance, he was planning a route to Tampa, Florida. His car was missing from the family home, leading the authorities to declare it wanted and distribute descriptions of both Ian and Rachel. It seemed they was involved in the crime and was now on the run. Authorities began to track the activity of their bank cards, and less than a day later, they recorded a payment at a gas station in Louisiana. On September 15, 2006, one of the officers noticed Ian's car on the road. He was stopped and surrendered without resistance. Interestingly, as soon as the car was stopped, Rachel ran out, approached the officers, claiming she had been kidnapped and held against her will. Although her story appeared unconvincing, Ian was arrested and taken to the police station while Rachel was sent to the hospital. Doctors confirmed that she showed no signs of torture or even forced detention. It seems she was in the car voluntarily, without any coercion. Moreover, during subsequent interviews with law enforcement officers, discrepancies and contradictions were noted in her story. After a medical examination, Rachel was also arrested and taken to the station. She stated that on the night of September 13, 2006, she woke up to her mother's screams. Rachel jumped out of bed and ran to Barbara's bedroom, where she saw her boyfriend stabbing Barbara to death. As soon as he saw Rachel, he punched her in the face, causing her to fall and lose consciousness. She only regained her senses later in a hotel room where he had kidnapped her. He held Rachel there for several days before they began moving towards the state line to escape. Rachel insisted that she had been kidnapped, but the police quickly gathered evidence suggesting that she was lying. At the very least, there were no signs of a punch on her face as she had claimed. Additionally, her DNA samples were found on the latex gloves, the sponges, and even on the tape that was used to cover the box containing the body in Barbara's bedroom. This indicated that she at least assisted in the attempt to remove the evidence. The criminals had cleaned the knives, and there were no fingerprints on the handles, making it possible to reconstruct the course of events only from the statements of the killers. When reviewing the correspondence between Rachel and Ian, investigators discovered that Rachel had been spinning tales about her boyfriend for quite some time, including that her mother was going to kill her and that she faced daily threats. She simply feared for her life. Of particular importance were the girl's messages on the night of the murder, where she wrote to her boyfriend about another conflict with her mother, stating it was time for them to put an end to it. What exactly she meant remained a mystery. Rachel insisted that they had discussed escaping to another state, yet the context seemed more grim. Police reviewed CCTV footage from the gas station Rachel and Ian visited before their arrest. The recordings showed Rachel calmly walking next to her boyfriend, smiling. She was clearly not in captivity. Detectives decided to speak with Ian once more, and until that moment, he had denied any accusations. Finally, Ian confessed that a brutal crime had occurred. According to him, Barbara had threatened that she would press charges against him for the corruption of a minor, fearing that he would lose his job. He believed that Rachel's freedom was at stake, and an unstable, alcoholic woman could ruin his life, which he could not permit. Thus, the young lovers decided that the only way to solve the problem was to kill her. They planned the entire thing together, with Rachel watching for the perfect moment when her mother would be most vulnerable. Thanks to Rachel, he learned that Bruce was going on a business trip at night. He entered the house after Rachel left the door unlocked while her mother was asleep in the kitchen. He took several knives and then attacked Barbara. His first blow landed on her eye. He thought it would instantly kill her, but he was wrong. He could not pull the knife out of her eye socket. Instead of dying, she screamed loudly and began to resist. Out of fear, he kept striking her with another knife because he wanted her to be quiet as quickly as possible. He took the blame for the crime, claiming that Rachel was just watching, then helped to clean the room and dispose of the body. Ian's story sounded convincing but had one flaw: he reported only 2 knives, while police found 3. Investigators believe that Barbara's daughter also took an active part in the murder and used a 3rd knife. They then wrapped the body, along with the murder weapon, in a sheet, placed it in a large TV box, and removed it from the house, eventually throwing it in the water. Bruce's neighbor, Malini, confirmed that on that fateful night, he heard loud noises coming from the apartment. He saw 2 young people, a guy and a girl, carrying out a large box at night, which seemed strange, especially since he had heard women's screams just half an hour earlier. It became apparent that they were disposing of a body to attract less attention. After getting rid of Barbara's body, the young people returned. Rachel was cleaning up the blood in her mother's bedroom while her boyfriend was taking a mattress and several other items far from the crime scene to burn. During this time, Rachel was even writing a love message to Ian, clearly not upset by her mother's death. Investigators believed that Rachel actively participated in the crime because she behaved too calmly and did not even attempt to call for help. Instead, she encouraged her boyfriend to finish what he had started. This behavior contradicted her boyfriend's claim that Rachel was petrified with horror during the massacre. In June 2008, Rachel's trial began. By this time, her story had changed several times. Now, the criminal admitted that she had lied about the kidnapping and that she had gone with Ian voluntarily. At the trial, she adhered to a version more reminiscent of Ian's words, saying that she was scared and became an accomplice not of her own free will, but simply out of fear. However, this narrative seemed more like a return to the general legend from which she had initially deviated. Rachel continued to insist that she did not participate in the massacre, simply cleaned up the traces of the crime and helped get rid of the body by packing it in a box. The lawyer failed to convince the court of her innocence, and the jury found her guilty of murdering Barbara. Rachel was sentenced to 25 years in prison. 2 months after these events, the trial of Ian Allen began. When he learned how Rachel had shifted all the blame onto him and also fabricated a story about the kidnapping, he stopped covering for her in anger. He stated that she had been the mastermind of the crime from the very beginning. However, now it was too much. The prosecutor's office convincingly proved that he cold-bloodedly stabbed a defenseless woman in a fit of hatred. Ian was also found guilty and sentenced to a similar punishment of 25 years in prison, despite the guy's words. Even now, many support Rachel and consider her innocent. In particular, her brother and grandparents believe that she is a victim. On October 14, 2022, Rachel was released early from prison for good behavior. She went to live with her father in Newport Beach, California, where he still resides, while Ian Allen is still serving his sentence in a state prison. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nolan Buchanan. California is known for its beautiful natural attractions, particularly in El Dorado County, which borders Nevada and is close to the well-known Lake Tahoe. In this rural region lies the small town of Greenwood, home to over 1,000 residents. Tourism is one of the main economic sectors here. On the morning of Sunday, September 13, 2015, Everything seemed normal until an urgent call to 911 reported a large fire in the forest area. Immediate action was necessary to prevent the fire from spreading. Firefighters quickly arrived at the scene and began extinguishing the fire, but the flames rapidly surged to heights of 33 feet. Fortunately, there was a stream nearby that helped extinguish most of the fire. The next step was to check the area to ensure that no one was injured and to assess the damage. During the survey, it was found that a small building measuring about 55 square meters had completely burned down, with only the foundation remaining. What caught the firefighters' attention was a strange smell that was later identified as the smell of burning flesh. Initially, the firefighters considered the possibility that a pet might have been trapped inside the house, but they quickly ruled this out when they found a human skull and a burnt rib cage. Sadly, it became clear that the fire had claimed someone's life. The grim discovery was promptly reported to the police, who faced a challenge. Parts of the house were still on fire, making it impossible to conduct a thorough examination. They had to wait until the fire was out and the temperature dropped. As the police stood outside observing the fire, they reached some preliminary conclusions. They determined that the house was clearly not the owner's official residence since it was situated in a remote and isolated area. Additionally, the house was very small, measuring less than 60 square meters, and it was likely a vacation home. Through their ongoing surveillance, the police suspected there might be more victims beyond the remains they had found, but they could not confirm this. To gather more insights, they decided to examine the nearby area. The total area associated with the house was 8 hectares and was owned by someone. On the property, they discovered a large trailer and an old pickup truck, which were registered to a company. They were able to check the license plates to identify the vehicle's owner, who might have been in the house during the fire. The search was quick, revealing that the truck and trailer belonged to a company called Buchanan Construction, owned by an individual named Adam Buchanan. Adam lived 250 kilometers, 155 miles, away, which is about a 3-hour drive. This information supported the police's suspicion that the house was merely a vacation retreat for those looking to escape the city. However, it remained to be determined who had been inside, Adam himself or someone else. Late on September 13th, 2 bodies were discovered in the burning building. The name of the company owner provided detectives with their first lead in the investigation. The police were tasked with checking on the well-being of all members of the Buchanan family to see if they were at home. They arrived at the family's residence and soon noticed a white Ford pickup truck in the driveway. A young man named Nolan Buchanan emerged from the house, surprised to see the uniformed officers, and asked about the reason for their visit. The police did not disclose the reason right away, wanting first to determine who else was home. Nolan announced that he was Adam's son from Adam's first marriage. He stated that his father, Adam, had gone to the country estate with his fiancée, Molly, and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, for a short vacation, and they planned to return that evening. The officers needed to identify the bodies found in the house, as they might belong to the Buchanan family members. Nolan stated that there should have been 3 people in the home, but only 2 bodies were found in the debris. To determine the identities, further examination was required, but the wreckage was still too hot for a thorough inspection. The next day, September 14th, the El Dorado County Police planned to speak with Nolan again to gather more information about the victims of the fire. The officers met with Adam's parents, who expressed their concern that their son, the owner of the burnt house, had not reached out to them. During their conversation, it became apparent that Adam, who had some experience with repairs, had been working on fixing the house. Although the building was connected to a generator, there was no electricity at the time of the incident. However, there were gas cylinders present, suggesting that the fire could have started accidentally or been set intentionally. Both possibilities remained open. Afterward, the police continued to search the forest area and gathered some evidence, though it was insufficient to advance the investigation. They could only access the ruins of the burnt house on September 15th. Investigators hoped that the objects discovered inside would provide crucial information for understanding the incident that occurred there. During the excavation process, they discovered a 3rd body, which attracted a lot of attention from the investigators because there was a round hole in one of the bones. This discovery suggested that something sinister had happened within the house. Accidental death was ruled out, and the possibility of murder became the primary focus. There was a strong belief that the fire had been set to destroy evidence of the crime. However, questions remained about how the incident occurred. Was it a botched burglary, or was a dangerous killer responsible for the deaths in that area? While the victims had not yet been identified, there was a strong likelihood that they were all members of the Buchanan family. To confirm this, the remains were sent to a forensic expert for an autopsy, with instructions to identify the bodies and determine their causes of death. It was discovered that one victim had been attacked in the torso, and another victim had a bullet fragment found in their vertebra. Unfortunately, the second body was too severely charred to yield much information, but the presence of cartridges nearby strongly suggested intentional murder. The remains of a third individual, identified as a skull fragment, confirmed that the person had died from a weapon attached to the head. The medical examiner revealed that the victim was a child. Detectives verified their suspicions about the identities of the deceased, confirming they were members of the Buchanan family: Adam, Gavin, and Molly McAfee. All three of them had been attacked. The police faced a difficult challenge in informing the victims' families about their tragic fate. The families had held on to hope until the end, struggling to accept the reality of their loss, and nothing could truly prepare them for the heartbreaking news. Upon learning what happened, the relatives were left devastated and grief-stricken. Neither Molly, known for her cheerful and friendly demeanor, nor Adam, who cherished his partner, had any enemies who would wish them harm. Although Adam had experienced a difficult marriage and raised his son Nolan from that relationship, this alone seemed unlikely to lead to murder. Marriages often have their ups and downs, and many couples find themselves separated or divorced. After parting ways with his first wife, Adam continued to care for their son, Nolan, hoping that Nolan would one day take over his construction business. After overcoming his emotional pain, Adam decided to seek a new relationship with Molly through a dating website. Their first date took place at a Starbucks coffee shop. They discovered they had much in common, including Molly's experience working in a construction company. It was love at first sight. Adam wasted no time in inviting Molly to move in with him, and she happily agreed. Their life together blossomed, and for 10 years, they enjoyed a deep and fulfilling partnership. Both of them dreamed of having a child. A few years after they met, Molly became pregnant and gave birth to Gavin, who became a half-brother to Nolan, Adam's eldest son. It seemed like a perfect family picture. However, family members noticed that their relationship was not as stable as it appeared. Adam and Molly often argued. Although Molly never filed for divorce, she would occasionally take their son and stay at her parents' house for a few days. It was also revealed that Adam and Molly liked to hunt near their country home. Since both owned weapons, investigators speculated that during one of their arguments, one of them might have grabbed a weapon, leading to a tragic outcome. The investigation raised concerns. If the tragedy stemmed from a conflict between the couple, there should have been a weapon found next to one of the bodies. The police carried out a thorough search of the scene to find the weapon involved in the incident. The possibility that the weapon had been badly damaged or almost completely destroyed in the fire was considered, but the search for it continued. If the weapon had been found, it would have supported the theory that Adam and Molly were involved. If not, it would suggest that an outsider may have harmed the family. Over 5 days, forensic team members methodically sifted through the ashes of the house. Their thorough search ultimately yielded no weapons, leading to the conclusion that Adam and Molly were not the perpetrators. It was also clear that 8-year-old Gavin was innocent, indicating that a fourth person was involved in the incident. The absence of a murder weapon was troubling, as it meant the investigation had to restart from square one, without any suspects or evidence. As is customary in such cases, detectives meticulously examined the family's history and relationships. While they had already interviewed Adam's parents, they had not yet spoken with his eldest son, Nolan. It was time to ask him some questions. The 16-year-old boy, Nolan, shared that after his parents divorced, he felt very anxious but tried to stay strong. He lived with his grandparents. When asked why he didn't go on vacation with his relatives, he explained that he felt it was his responsibility to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. According to Nolan, they got into an old pickup truck and headed to Greenwood, the same truck that the police had seen near the burning building. Adam chose to use the service vehicle rather than his own because it was loaded with stones he planned to use for landscaping at his country home. The investigators asked Nolan if he was aware of any issues with his neighbors. He replied that someone was regularly growing banned substances on his family's remote property. This caught the detectives' attention, particularly because, in this part of the United States, violent crime is often associated with the cultivation of banned substances. The conversation with Nolan continued, shifting to the family business. He revealed that his father's business had been struggling lately. The company was facing significant challenges in the United States, with its employee count dwindling to just 5. Financially, the situation was critical, and the debts related to the business were quickly accumulating, according to what his father reported. Fortunately, the investigation had gathered valuable information, allowing the case to progress. On September 18, 2015, investigators began looking into a conflict that arose regarding the cultivation of illegal plants in that area. It was revealed that there was indeed a disagreement between Adam and his neighbors. He confronted them, demanding that they stop growing and harvesting the tree on his property, threatening to involve the police if they did not comply. Detectives believed that this ultimatum could potentially escalate into a desire to harm Adam's family. However, no one knew which neighbor was involved. To gather more details about the situation, the investigators decided to explore the neighborhood on foot. One of the investigators had a breakthrough when he met a man who admitted to arguing with Adam over the cultivation of an illegal crop. The argument was intense, but they managed to resolve their differences. However, Adam's business was facing a financial crisis. On September 17, police conducted a raid on Adam's company, confirming Nolan's claims about its dire situation. Debts exceeding $30,000 were putting it at risk of bankruptcy, leading to layoffs of some employees. It came to light that some of these former employees were very unhappy about being let go and might have motives related to the murder investigation. Investigators sought and obtained a warrant to access the company's premises and review its documents. The following day, September 19, local high school students participated in a community cleanup just a mile away from Adam's construction company. During the cleanup process, a student discovered a small bag hidden behind a bush, with a weapon next to it. The school management promptly informed the police, who examined the bag and found Adam's identification inside it. This led to a new theory: the victims were murdered, the weapon was found, and the killer may have taken Adam's documents in order to obstruct the investigation. The discovery was crucial, revealing that someone had traveled from Greenwood to confront the family before returning to Benicia, where they abandoned the bag and weapon. It was likely that the perpetrator was from the local area. Detectives were convinced that the culprit was one of the employees from Adam's construction company, as evidence was discovered just a mile away from the company's headquarters. The weapon and the items found in the bag were well preserved, so they were sent for examination. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators began examining the company's buildings, focusing particularly on financial records that could reveal the names of potential creditors. During the investigation, detectives discovered a surveillance camera at the company's premises, which was a welcome sign. The camera was aimed at the center of the parking lot. Knowing that the family had gone to the countryside on Friday, September 11th, the investigators decided to review the footage from that day to see if anything unusual occurred. In the video, they spotted a large trailer that had previously come to their attention near the family's burned home. The footage also showed Adam and Molly loading pallets of decorative rocks. However, a critical moment changed the course of the investigation. Although it initially seemed insignificant, the vehicle towing the trailer was not the old white pickup parked at the burnt house. It was a white Ford that had been seen in the driveway of the Buchanan home when investigators first questioned Nolan. He had falsely claimed that his relatives had left in the old pickup. With this revelation, the police became very interested in his story. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, had a suspicion that something was off when she noticed a Ford parked near the burnt house, which was later replaced by an old car. Concerned, She called the police after a strange incident during a family dinner earlier that week. Nolan, who had been questioned about the country house, made an unusual remark, claiming he was no longer just an heir but now the owner. Although his father, Adam, had founded the company, Nolan insisted that the rights had transferred to him. Nolan explained how he planned to take control of the family business and sell its assets to prevent its downfall. It was surprising to hear such statements from someone so young, especially after losing his family. Susie, puzzled by Nolan's odd behavior, contacted the police to express her concerns. As a result, the police summoned Nolan for another interrogation. They did not charge him with any crime or demand explanations. They merely took his statement, in which he spoke vaguely about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. During the second questioning, Nolan provided more details. He claimed that he spent Saturday alone on September 12, 2015, attended church with his girlfriend and her family on Sunday morning. Later, he met friends at the shopping center and then returned to see his girlfriend. The investigators allowed him to continue without interruption but asked once how he had paid for his shopping and date expenses. Nolan said his father's bank card was at home and he used it. Following this, the police requested a search warrant for Adam's house, anticipating valuable evidence. They hoped to seize the bank card to review any transactions. The warrant was granted, and investigators rushed to Adam's house, where they found the card in the upper part of a safe. They also noticed a Ford parked in the driveway, which had dirt lodged in the wheels. It had just rained, and according to the police, the dirt on the wheels might have been washed away or at least significantly reduced. Additionally, a construction company's surveillance camera showed that Nolan had lied about the old pickup truck that the family was supposed to have left behind. The Ford was confiscated for further analysis, making Nolan the main suspect in the murder. Even though he was already under police scrutiny, gathering enough evidence to prove his involvement would be challenging, especially since he was a minor accused of murdering his family. The suspicions were confirmed when the investigation began with laboratory tests on the murder weapon, which revealed Nolan's fingerprints. This indicates that he possessed a weapon. However, further evidence is needed to prove that he went to the scene where his family was present. Detectives examined the bank transactions of Molly and Adam in the days leading up to the murder. A transaction took place on September 11th, just as the family was getting ready to go to their country house. A payment of $36 was made at a restaurant in a small town along the route to Greenwood. When investigators contacted the restaurant management, they confirmed that they had surveillance cameras. The timing of the transaction allowed detectives to establish when the family should have been at the restaurant. In the video footage, they identified the same white Ford towing a large trailer, which had been seen at the crime scene and had been searched and confiscated a few days earlier. Law enforcement officers discovered a receipt for a transaction on Friday, September 11, 2015, which raised questions about the details of the order. The receipt indicated that several sandwiches and 4 drinks had been purchased. Since the Buchanans were a group of 3, the question arose, why would they order 4 drinks? Investigators collected the bag and other trash found in the car to reconstruct the menu associated with the receipt. They also reviewed the trash discovered earlier in the investigation in front of the vacation home. Upon comparing their findings, investigators confirmed that the Ford pickup truck had indeed been in Greenwood. The next bank card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at a vending machine in a bar approximately a 30-minute drive from Greenwood. As in the first case, investigators visited the bar to review the surveillance footage. The video clearly showed Molly, as well as a woman nearby, withdrawing $40 from an ATM to cover expenses. It was clear that Molly and Adam were present, as their car was visible in the footage outside the bar. This was significant because it confirmed that Adam had his bank card with him that evening, and it remained with him throughout the weekend. After determining the time Molly and Adam left the bar, detectives tracked their route. A restaurant along the way had a camera facing the highway, making it a valuable resource. Investigators reviewed the footage and verified that the Ford truck was headed toward Greenwood around 2:30 a.m. It was widely accepted that Adam and Molly were in the vehicle. However, at 3:30, the same pickup truck was noted returning. Detectives became convinced that, at that moment, Nolan was in the car, driving home after committing the act of killing his family and disposing of their bodies. On September 13th, new transactions were reviewed, including purchases at McDonald's and gas stations. The records indicated that there was no food for 4 people in the paid order. It was noted that the Ford was still parked near the burned house and was driven by Nolan. The detectives checked with the bank and confirmed that only one card had been issued in Adam's name. It was clear that this card had been used between September 11th and 13th in Greenwood. With solid evidence in hand, the detectives returned to question Nolan, who was still in high school at that time. Nolan was called out of class for questioning. He said his father had left his bank card at home and had driven to a country house in an old pickup truck, not the Ford he was driving. Faced with the evidence, he fell silent, realizing that the police had caught on to him. After a tense silence, Nolan was officially arrested for the crime committed at the Greenwood house. In November 2015, Nolan was charged with the premeditated murder of his father, Adam, his stepmother, Molly, and his younger brother, Gavin. The defense quickly appealed to a juvenile court to have the case dismissed in Nolan's favor. The legal proceedings in adult court lasted 2 years, and in 2017, they received a response to their request. The ruling confirmed that Nolan would be tried as an adult, even though he had not yet turned 18 at the time of the crimes. The hearings were highly emotional as Nolan claimed he wasn't the killer. He insisted that his father was responsible and that he was merely defending himself. This shocking statement surprised not only the police but also the families of both Adam and Molly. Nolan said he was resting at their family's Greenwood home on September 12th, while Gavin was sleeping in a bed nearby. They both suddenly woke to loud noises and screaming. At that moment, Nolan noticed a weapon aimed at Gavin, and then a shot was fired, killing his younger brother. In a state of panic, Nolan lunged for the weapon. Miraculously, he managed to push the attacker away, take control of the weapon, and attack the man twice. Only after the attack did he realize that the person he was confronting was his father. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he then poured gasoline from a car onto the house and set it ablaze to make it look like nothing had happened. He subsequently left Greenwood in the family's white Ford. However, this account was challenged by a forensic expert, who noted that a bullet impact found on a fragment of Gavin's skull indicated that a shot was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. The prosecution concluded that Nolan, left alone at home while his parents were at a bar, waited for their return before killing both of them. Evidence suggests he killed Adam first, followed by Molly. Afterward, Nolan took his stepmother's bag and set the house on fire. On Sunday, he spent the day with his girlfriend to establish an alibi. However, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, as he has not confessed. Some speculated could be related to money. Perhaps he thought he could manage the family business better than his father. On July 13, 2018, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nolan Buchanan guilty of murdering Adam, Molly, and their son Gavin. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison but will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The Nolan Buchanan case is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many questions for the residents of Greenwood and the Adam and Molly families. The family had a seemingly peaceful vacation at a vacation home in the woods, but tragedy suddenly struck, taking the lives of Adam, Molly, and Gavin. Nolan, a 16-year-old boy, went from heir to murderer and was sentenced to 150 years in prison for premeditated murder. The true motive behind this brutal act remains a mystery known only to Nolan. However, he has chosen to keep it a secret, leaving behind loss and sorrow for those left behind. Thank you for following this story. Please share your thoughts and don't forget to check out the next episodes on our channel. See you again. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sandra Rozzo. Sandra Rozzo was a friendly and optimistic woman who always persevered. She lives in the town of Palace Park in Florida, USA, and aspires to build a career in the film and modeling industry. Anyone who has met her once realizes that she possesses all the qualities necessary to achieve this goal: an attractive appearance, a well-proportioned body, and charisma. Sandra began her modeling journey during her school years. She was actively involved in sports, particularly weightlifting, maintained her figure, and always dressed impeccably. During the day, she searched for modeling jobs, while at night, she worked as a bartender in a nightclub in Tampa, where she lived with her family. Sandra had always wanted to create a family and form meaningful relationships. Her attractive appearance draws the attention of many people, but finding the right partner is not easy. She set high standards, making it difficult for anyone to meet her expectations. At 37, she was divorced and living with her teenage daughter, Giovanna. She maintained a friendly relationship with her ex-husband and shared custody of their daughter. However, she is not willing to lower her standards in her search for happiness. Eventually, she met Timothy Alvin Tracy Humphrey, a tall and athletic man who stood nearly 190 centimeters tall. He claimed to have been a lingerie model and a professional football player. Among his friends, Timothy was known as an exceptional sports trainer. It was no surprise that he worked at a fitness center, where he was very popular with clients, particularly women who were drawn to his classes. Timothy was gentle and composed, capable of bringing joy to others and offering valuable advice to clients. Many girls who met him viewed him as the ideal man. Sandra felt the same way when they first encountered each other at the nightclub bar where she worked. At that time, Timothy worked at the club as a security guard in the evening and was very respected. Other men were shy around him, while women often approached him. He was cheerful and engaging and shared fascinating stories from his life. These tales suggested he had a diverse background, including experiences in the film and modeling industry, which piqued Sandra's interest. He claimed he was once supposed to be a stunt double for Vin Diesel, but circumstances led him to pursue a different path. Timothy had a talent for captivating his audience with his stories, which they listened to with interest and belief. Among these narratives was the intriguing claim that he had worked as Tom Cruise's bodyguard for a time. While the truth of this story remains uncertain, many people were eager to believe it. Sandra was much like Timothy in many ways. She was attractive, athletic, confident, and charismatic, which naturally drew people to her. Therefore, it's not surprising that Timothy felt a connection when he first met her. He approached Sandra at the Pinellas Park Club in November 2001, impressed by her looks. Initially, they chatted as friends, enjoying each other's company, and Timothy clearly noticed her above all others. As time passed, their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Their romance developed quickly over about 4 months. During this time, Timothy proudly boasted to his friends that he was dating a woman who loved intimacy and adventure, describing their relationship as very passionate. However, their idyllic situation didn't last. They began to experience disagreements and arguments, which Timothy attributed to a particular incident after one wild night at a nightclub. During a party, they were caught in a private moment by a police patrol while in Timothy's Mercedes. Timothy thought Sandra was upset about being seen without clothes, which made her angry. He found humor in the situation, but this only deepened the conflict between them. Although many viewed the incident as a simple misunderstanding, Sandra took it very seriously and was frustrated with Timothy. The disagreements led to a major argument that night. Despite feeling unhappy, they returned to Timothy's house with 2 other girls, and the party continued. At some point, likely due to alcohol and the carefree atmosphere, the girls' behavior annoyed Sandra. Feeling jealous, she asked them to leave. This marked the beginning of issues in her relationship with Timothy. By the end of the night, she decided she needed space to think, which possibly led to a breakup. A couple of days later, Timothy boasted that Sandra couldn't live without him. That's why they had the rough intimacy she initiated. He repeatedly shared stories about how much Sandra enjoyed being treated roughly during intimate moments. He believed that a little pain was acceptable in their relationship and considered it normal. However, not everyone thought their experiences were consensual. Sandra, who had visible bruises after the meeting, shared a different story with her family. She revealed that her boyfriend had set up the meeting and that she only now realized he had lured her into his apartment. Once they arrived, Timothy had already started drinking and became quite drunk. His true nature soon emerged. He became aggressive and started arguing with her. During this confrontation, he hit Sandra, leaving bruises under her eyes. It is clear that no woman should endure such treatment, especially one aspiring to a career in modeling and film, where mutual consent and respect are essential. While her family supported her, Timothy's friends and acquaintances sided with him. Sandra described the horrifying attack by her abusive boyfriend. His violence escalated beyond just hitting her. He tied her to the bed, abused her, and threatened to kill both her and her daughter. In this chaotic and terrifying situation, she felt completely lost. It took the Supreme Court a week to process and understand what she had endured. After much hesitation, she made the decision to report Timothy to the police. For Timothy, this arrest was entirely unexpected. During the arrest, he repeatedly asked what was happening, trying to comprehend the situation. At the police station, he explained his side of the story. He claimed there had been no argument with his girlfriend, they were just throwing a pillow. When he threw the pillow back, he said he swung too hard and accidentally knocked out Sandra's contact lenses, causing her to fall and hit her head. He refuted all allegations of threats or abuse. Sandra took the physical assault she reported very seriously. She provided a detailed account of the incident, and there was no indication of any playful behavior. Everything she described felt very grave and alarming. According to her, after the conflict began, Timothy shoved her onto the bed, sat on top of her, and pressed her head between his legs. He was stronger than she was and used ropes to tie her to the bed. When she screamed and resisted, he hit her several times, leaving bruises under her eyes. She was unable to resist and could not defend herself. Timothy had complete control over the situation. After the assault, he began to threaten her with violence, including the murder of her daughter, which deeply traumatized her. He likely feared being reported to the authorities, and rightfully so. Sandra accused Timothy of both assault and abuse, but unfortunately, it was too late for her to pursue justice. After a week of gathering the strength to approach the police, all physical evidence, such as DNA and bruises, had vanished. Despite this delay, the authorities were determined to respond. They decided to charge Timothy with assault, which could result in a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. This possibility terrified him, leading him to confide in family and friends about his fears. He declared that he would end his life if he were detained. According to the police, it was during this time of desperation that Timothy devised a deceptive plan, hoping others would believe his troubles would simply vanish. Timothy was released on bail while awaiting trial for assault. Friends joked about his character, predicting that he would try to sleep with as many attractive women as possible before facing the consequences. However, by the fall of 2002, things took an unexpected turn. During this time, Timothy met a young girl named Ashley Laney, who had just graduated from high school. At 19, she fit Timothy's preferred type. She was not overly bold or flashy. He saw her as a quiet, somewhat shy person when they roller skated together. They discovered they shared similar musical tastes. Ashley worked with a friend at an ice cream shop right across from the gym where Timothy was a trainer. He soon realized that the girl he had casually encountered at the skate park was working just a short distance from him. Timothy later admitted that he visited Ashley's shop on purpose because he found her charming, attractive, and lively. However, the odd thing was that Ashley differed significantly from Timothy's usual preferences. Most of the girls he was used to were dancers or barmaids from the clubs where he worked part-time as security, or gym-goers who were bold and self-assured. Ashley was a bright girl with ambitions, studying hard and planning to attend college. However, her family life was far from perfect. She was shocked to discover that her father had spent most of his life in prison for various crimes, only to be briefly released before returning to jail for new offenses. Ashley lived with her mother, who struggled with alcoholism and often lashed out physically when under the influence. Additionally, her mother frequently brought home unsavory partners, which deeply affected her. Her friends believed these traumatic experiences contributed to her feelings of insecurity and vulnerability. Despite her challenges, Ashley longed to find a good partner. She was flattered by the attention of an older man named Timothy and quickly became close to him after he expressed interest. Within a month, they were living together. During this time, Ashley continued to work, selling ice cream alongside her best friend, Charlie Williams. Charlie soon noticed negative changes in Ashley's behavior and suspected that Timothy was having a harmful influence on her fragile state of mind. Ashley became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding those around her. It seemed as though a manipulator had taken control of her life. Despite this, Ashley felt content in her relationship and had no intention of changing it. In fact, she started to distance herself from her close friends and took a new job. Only 2 of her old friends remained in contact with her. One of them joined Timothy at the gym, and eventually, they decided to start their own personal training business for athletes. In public, Timothy acted like a man deeply in love with Ashley, constantly expressing his genuine feelings and serious intentions. However, Ashley's friend Charlie suspected that this was all a facade. She heard rumors about Timothy being unfaithful and noted that he did not make much of an effort to hide his flirtations. This led to persistent gossip about his involvement with various women at the bar. Charlie tried several times to discuss her concerns with Ashley, believing that the situation was unhealthy. Under the influence of a manipulator, Ashley could be putting herself in danger. Ashley ignored any evidence against her boyfriend, Timothy, and fully trusted him. Charlie thought Ashley was simply in love. Unfortunately, Charlie's attempts to help her were unsuccessful, and they began to drift apart, just as Ashley's relationships with others in her social circle did. By the spring of 2003, almost everyone had distanced themselves, leaving only Timothy. He told Ashley that he was facing a serious prison sentence. At the same time, he convinced Ashley that his ex-girlfriend, Sandra, was lying when she said she couldn't live without him. This manipulation gave him considerable power over Ashley. After that moment, Timothy decided to turn Ashley against Sandra. It wasn't difficult for him to do, especially given Ashley's sincere feelings and her reliance on him for support. The breakup with Timothy meant that Ashley would have to return to the trailer park to live with her mother, a prospect she dreaded more than anything. She wanted to avoid going back to the terrible past she had fought so hard to escape. In return, Timothy not only asked her to be his girlfriend but also offered her a business opportunity in which she would be an equal partner. This made Ashley financially and emotionally dependent on him. The manipulation didn't stop there. About a week before the trial for the attack, Timothy and Ashley got married. He later admitted to his friends that it was his idea. They held their wedding ceremony at the gym where they worked, with no witnesses or wedding rings, just a marriage certificate. Although it lacked romance, things worsened when they couldn't go on their honeymoon due to the circumstances. Then, just a day after their wedding on July 5, 2003, Sandra was attacked and killed while she was parking her car in the garage. She was attacked 8 times at close range, and forensic experts discovered numerous shell casings in the garage. When investigating Sandra's death, the police quickly realized that Timothy was her only potential enemy with a motive. He was not only accused of assault but also became the main suspect in her murder. The detectives faced one major challenge. Timothy had easily provided an alibi for the time of the attack. He claimed to have been at home eating pizza, an account confirmed by his friend and the delivery courier who personally handed the pizza to him. When investigators arrived at his home, they decided to speak with his new wife, Ashley, who was visibly nervous and appeared scared. She was under a lot of stress, so much so that she almost vomited twice during their conversation. Unfortunately, they didn't gather any significant information during this first meeting. However, afterwards, the police suspected that Ashley might be involved in the crime, and her anxious behavior led them to think she felt guilty. What's suspicious is that just a month before the murder, Ashley's car caught fire. She reported it as theft, but investigators suspected arson. This raised red flags, prompting them to investigate Ashley's background and activities. They discovered that she had purchased several paid computer programs for surveillance, one of which she used to monitor Sandra in real time, making her a suspect. The authorities also interviewed Ashley's mother's new boyfriend, David Abernathy. They found out that he owned several weapons. While a weapon he had previously owned was missing, he had lent another weapon to Ashley shortly before the attack. Furthermore, he still had ammunition for this weapon, which ballistics tests showed matched the shell casings found in Sandra's garage. More evidence supporting the suspicions continued to emerge. Ashley's mobile phone signal was detected near Sandra's house shortly before and after the murder, suggesting that she was present at the scene of the crime. With this evidence, the police arrested Ashley for first-degree murder. She maintained her innocence, claiming she didn't know Sandra, and requested a lawyer. Initially, she appeared confident and did not break under interrogation. However, after 3 weeks in jail, she confessed to attacking Sandra. Ashley revealed that her actions were driven by fear that her husband Timothy would be imprisoned. However, the investigation uncovered that the attack was not impulsive. It was the result of a detailed and planned murder scheme, which included multiple attempts. Before asking David for a weapon, Ashley had taken a small weapon from her mother's trailer. This weapon was simple enough for her to use with little experience, and she practiced handling it. She also experimented with different masks and techniques to conceal her identity. Ashley went to Meshkova dressed for the occasion and painted her face as part of her plan. A month before the murder, Ashley visited the Pinellas Park bar where Sandra worked. That day, she spent hours in her car watching Sandra's vehicle. When Sandra finally left the bar and got into her car, Ashley attacked her. The sound of the gun startled Sandra, leaving her confused and unaware of what had just occurred. She simply got into her car and drove off. If she had realized she was close to death, things might have turned out very differently. In a common mistake made by inexperienced killers, Ashley accidentally shot her own car's mirror because she misaligned her aim. After that, she set her car on fire outside the city and reported it stolen to the police. She then gave some wallpaper to her mother. Following the wedding festivities, a new stage of her conspiracy began. The day after her wedding, Ashley returned to the parking lot of the bar where Sandra worked. This time, armed with a weapon, she fell asleep and missed the moment Sandra got into her car. However, she noticed Sandra's black BMW leaving the lot and, determined not to fail again, followed Sandra's home. There, she attacked Sandra just as she parked in Sandra's garage and was still seated in her car. Timothy was suspected of being involved in the conspiracy, but he claimed to be completely shocked by the events. He insisted that he was unaware of any plan to attack Sandra. However, the detectives believed it resembled a contract killing, suggesting that Ashley had been manipulated into committing the crime rather than motivated by money. Timothy had a strong motive for the murder, which raised further questions. Interestingly, Florida law prevents one spouse from being compelled to testify against the other, providing a significant advantage for Timothy. Yet, this also heightened the detective's suspicion of his potential involvement in planning Sandra's murder. On the night of the murder, Ashley and Timothy made 22 phone calls to each other, leading investigators to suspect they were coordinating a violent plan. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, necessitating more information for a successful prosecution. As detectives dug deeper into Timothy's background, they discovered that his claims of a successful career were false. In reality, he had no modeling contracts and was a convicted felon with a criminal record that included theft and violent offenses against the wives of one of the undercover agents they employed. Controversy surrounded Sandra's murder, along with the rumors about it. Timothy hinted at key details multiple times and even threatened that if the client reported to the police, there would be serious repercussions. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, but he maintained his innocence. In February 2006, just before Timothy's trial began, the prosecutor took advantage of Ashley's vulnerability. They offered her a plea deal to testify against her husband, which would ensure she avoided the death penalty and possibly received a lighter sentence of around 25 years in prison. She accepted the deal, which became a crucial part of the prosecution's case against him. During the trial, the prosecution portrayed Timothy as a manipulative individual who coerced a young and vulnerable Ashley into committing a crime. She detailed the extent of Timothy's control over her life, explaining that she couldn't leave their home without his permission and had no freedom to make friends without his consent. Over time, his possessiveness escalated into emotional and physical abuse. He would hit her, regularly threaten to kick her out of the house, and on several occasions, he caused injuries that made her lose consciousness. Despite this, she feared losing him and didn't want to return to her mother's home, where she felt conditions were even worse. At one point, Ashley realized that the only way to keep Timothy was to eliminate Sandra. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. Her husband had mentioned it after she expressed her desire to get rid of Sandra. He even created a plan for the murder that involved disguises and a weapon. After a failed first attempt, he became furious and threatened Ashley, saying that if she didn't get rid of Sandra, the source of his frustration, he would send her back to her mother in the trailer park. Ashley felt she had no choice. Ashley arrived at Sandra's house at 11:22 p.m. She jumped out of the car and rushed to the garage. Inside, she smashed the car window with a weapon. When Sandra saw her, Sandra began screaming. Without any hesitation, she attacked Sandra multiple times. After confirming that Sandra was dead, she called her husband, Timothy, to inform him that everything was taken care of. He instructed her to dispose of the evidence and to contact him again afterward. Ashley complied. During the trial, she claimed that her motive for the murder was love and the fear of losing Timothy. Timothy maintained his innocence and portrayed Ashley as a manipulative person. He claimed that the idea to kill Sandra was Ashley's and that he had tried to dissuade her from going through with it. However, no one believed him since Sandra's murder clearly benefited him. He wanted to eliminate a witness to his prior attack so that no one could expose him. Timothy attempted to challenge the evidence against him, claiming he was completely opposed to any harm Ashley wanted to inflict but had agreed to help gather evidence against Sandra. He intended to use that evidence to coerce Sandra into not testifying, hoping that this would allow him to remain free. He explained that the phone calls made before and after the massacre were part of the romantic phase of their relationship, during which they communicated frequently when they were not together. However, this claim was contradicted by evidence showing that on other days, their phone activity was minimal, despite his supposed deep feelings. Furthermore, he continued to express his feelings for other women. He formed relationships with different girls both before and after his marriage. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before reaching a verdict, in which they found Timothy Alvin Tracy Humphrey guilty of first-degree murder. 2 days after the sentencing, he returned to the courtroom to hear the decision. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sandra's mother expressed satisfaction with the verdict, believing that it served justice and was a harsher punishment than that of the death penalty. Later, Timothy attempted to appeal the verdict but was unsuccessful. He is still incarcerated, and his wife, Ashley Laney, is also serving a sentence. On March 10, 2006, Ashley was sentenced to 25 years in prison as part of a plea deal with the prosecution. She will be 46 years old when she is eligible for release in 2028. In January 2024, in northern Chile, a vast and barren desert became the site of a disturbing discovery. Human remains were found buried beneath the sand near the city of Calama, an isolated area where the harsh climate can preserve bodies for a long time. Their thorough examination indicated that the remains had been intentionally hidden. The rocky terrain made digging challenging. Authorities later confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis shows she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Remains identified as those of Javiera Jimenez, who went missing in 2022. Javiera Jimenez grew up in Chile. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility early on. Her parents worked diligently to create a comfortable life for their children and instilled values of determination and independence in them. Javiera learned quickly that to succeed, she would need to rely on her own hard work. From a young age, she was known for her energetic and goal-oriented personality. In school, she excelled in academics, especially in math and science. However, her greatest passion was working with people. She had a natural talent for connecting with others. She was always eager to help and foster relationships. As a teenager, Javiera aspired to become a dentist. After finishing high school, she enrolled in college to study dental care, dreaming of becoming a skilled professional and eventually opening her own practice. Determined to advance her career, she balanced her studies with a part-time job as a hostess at a bar, where she welcomed customers and helped create a friendly atmosphere. This job not only provided her with income but also helped her enhance her communication skills. In addition to her studies and work, Javiera was actively building her presence on social media. She began by sharing small posts about her daily life, which garnered a larger audience over time. She collaborated with local brands to promote clothing, cosmetics, and other products. Her charm and engaging personality quickly made her blog popular. Javiera didn't focus only on work and academics. She prioritized personal development, was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, managed all her living expenses on her own. Her family was proud of her early independence and her ability to overcome challenges. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family, staying close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly, and sharing her future aspirations. A stagnant life was never an option for her. She was constantly striving to progress. Before she vanished, she had ambitious plans. She was getting ready to move into a new home, aiming to advance her social media career and continuing her studies. Javiera met Andres Sutter in 2022 through a group of mutual friends she frequently hung out with. Initially, there were no red flags with Andres. He was charming, self-assured, and good at building relationships. He made a strong first impression, appearing considerate, engaged, and truly interested in her life. Soon after, their talks evolved into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything felt ideal. He was supportive, encouraged her goals, and admired her independence. However, as time passed, red flags began to appear. Javiera noticed that Andres was excessively jealous. He was uncomfortable with her job at the bar, monitored her interactions, and frequently asked where she was, who she was with. His behavior became increasingly intrusive. He would show up unexpectedly, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her phone, questioning every new contact. His jealousy became unreasonable. He particularly disliked it when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if men were present. Soon, other troubling issues emerged. Andres was often unclear about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job but always seemed to have money. When she inquired about his work, he avoided giving direct answers. Over time, Javiera discovered that Andres's name was associated with certain groups involved in illegal activities. Among a small circle of friends, rumors circulated that he might be involved in criminal activities, including theft and the illegal trade of copper. The turning point in Javiera and Andres's relationship occurred when Javiera discovered that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with illegal activities and didn't want to be involved with someone who could put her in harm's way. Eventually, she decided to end their relationship, stating that she couldn't see a future with him. However, Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to pursue her, calling her frequently, showing up uninvited, and trying to persuade her to return to him. He dismissed her rejection, believing that she would eventually change her mind. As Javiera started to avoid him, Andres became even more persistent, threatening her by claiming he knew everything about her and wouldn't allow her to leave. Javiera had no idea that their breakup would have serious consequences. On August 26, 2022, Javiera's day began like any other. She and her mother, Gladys Galagillos, went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and discussed the changes coming in Javiera's life. Javiera is moving out. She was excited about this new chapter. During their conversation, Javiera expressed her ambitions for the future. She discussed her goals of advancing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her education. Her enthusiasm and drive were evident. Her mother felt happy seeing her daughter so excited. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera assisted her mother with household chores, then folded the things into the suitcase. Later that evening, before leaving, Javiera mentioned to her mother that she intended to spend the night at a friend's house. This was not unusual, as she often stayed over with friends. Once she arrived, she and her mother continued to text each other, as they usually did. Everything seemed perfectly normal. However, as midnight approached, a text arrived that changed everything. Andres messaged her, "I found your dog." This news was monumental for Javiera, as her dog, Lucky, had been missing for a few days, and she had been searching tirelessly. She had even posted on social media, offering a reward for Lucky's safe return, so she immediately reacted to Andres' message. Then she stopped texting her mom. A few hours later, all attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. The next day, Javiera was expected to come home, but she never arrived. Her family started reaching out to her friends, but no one knew her whereabouts. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in distress. They had only two clues: their last conversation with her and a message that later became crucial in the investigation. Javiera's disappearance caused deep concern for her family and friends. However, the one person who seemed unconcerned was Andres. When her mother finally managed to reach him, he responded in a detached manner, showing no signs of worry. When Gladys inquired about her daughter's location, he calmly stated he had no idea and then proceeded to share his version of events. That night, he met with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They drove to several places but couldn't find it. To distract her, he suggested going to Calama, his hometown. Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her because she was moving the next day, so it seemed she might have intended to stay at his place overnight. However, his account became less clear from there. He claimed they had an argument during the trip. Suddenly, Javiera realized that her suitcase was missing. She thought it might have fallen out of the trunk. Distressed, she insisted they go back to look for it. According to Andres' testimony, he left Javiera at the entrance to the city of Calama while he returned to retrieve a suitcase that fell out of the truck they were both traveling in. This version of events was confusing. Javiera was supposedly left alone on a highway at night, far from the city, without a way to get home or call for help. However, Andres made no effort to persuade her to return to the car, nor did he check if she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed something was wrong with his account. When she pressed him for details, Andres began to contradict himself. At first, he said he had dropped her off near Calama, then he changed it to somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't remember the exact spot, which raised further suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her or any of Javiera's friends to inform them that he left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. He said he thought she was just upset and would find her way home. A few hours later, he altered his story again, claiming that he had been in a car accident after leaving Javiera. He said another car had collided with his from behind, and he went to the hospital for a checkup. This, he explained, was why he didn't go back to look for her. Late Saturday night, almost 24 hours after Javiera went missing, her mother received an unexpected and concerning message from an unknown number. It read, "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother." Gladys read the message repeatedly, sensing something was amiss. The tone felt distant and impersonal, which alarmed her, but the errors stood out even more. Javiera was always meticulous with her texts, avoiding shortcuts and spelling mistakes. This message, however, was filled with typos and awkward phrasing that didn't match her style. Gladys tried to call the number, but the call failed. The phone had already been turned off, increasing her anxiety. Worried, she showed the message to Javier's friends, and they all agreed Javier would never write something like this. They recognized her usual texting style and emotional expressions. The content of the message was also suspiciously vague. Where was she? What kind of accident had occurred? Why hadn't she provided more details? Why send a cryptic message from an unknown number instead of calling? Gladys took immediate action and reported the message to the police. They documented it as a potential attempt to mislead the investigation and distract from a possible crime. A task force was quickly assigned to the case. Investigators traced the message to its originating SIM card. The phone carrier confirmed it was linked to a false identity, a common method used when buying anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement tried to locate the phone. They hoped to find its general location, but it had been turned off shortly after the message was sent. The last known signal placed it near Calama, the same area where Andres claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further examination revealed that the phone had only been used once, suggesting the message was pre-planned and aimed at deceiving her family into believing she had left on her own terms. Experts analyzed the content of the message and found that it did not match Javiera's usual writing style. The errors and unusual phrases were clear indicators that it was not written by her. This finding became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting that the message was fabricated and indicating that Javiera did not disappear voluntarily. As a result, investigators began treating the case as a potential crime, with Andres emerging as the primary suspect. However, the investigation progressed slowly due to a lack of concrete evidence. Concerned that each passing day without answers diminished their chances of uncovering the truth, Javiera's family and friends initiated their own investigation. They spoke with people familiar with Andres, examined his background, and searched for any links to criminal activity. Soon, they discovered evidence connecting him to illegal operations. Through shared contacts, they found individuals who claimed Andres had participated in stealing copper from trains and was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metals on the black market. Furthermore, accounts of his aggressive behavior emerged. Those who knew him described him as having a short temper and a tendency to get into conflicts, often involving physical fights, and an inability to tolerate being contradicted. These details increased the family's concerns. If Andres had a history of aggression, he was certainly capable of committing a serious crime, particularly in a moment of rage. Javier's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she expressed worry that he was tracking her, calling her several times a day, and demanding to know her whereabouts. While her loved ones continued to search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres's car. Since he was the last person known to see Javier alive, his truck could contain important evidence. Inside the truck, investigators discovered traces of blood. Initial analysis showed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also found fibers that seemed to match the clothing Javier was wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears: the blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This revelation completely undermined Andres's claim that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his truck voluntarily, why was her blood found inside? And if she had been injured, why didn't he report it? Police obtained GPS data from Andres' vehicle, which revealed that on the night Javier disappeared, he was driving towards Calama. However, instead of taking the main road, he opted for a side road that led into the desert. His car remained in that isolated area for a long time before it continued on its way. This discovery became a significant turning point in the case, leading investigators to suspect that a crime may have taken place there or that evidence was concealed. When Andres learned that the police had received forensic results, he understood that his arrest was imminent. His behavior changed. He ceased communication with everyone, including those he previously trusted. The day before he was scheduled to be questioned by police, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras recorded him exiting the building with a small backpack and getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he left in a hurry and did not return. Authorities quickly issued an arrest warrant for him, but by that point, he was already gone. Further investigation showed that Andres had used false documents to cross the border, making him a fugitive. His name was added to an international criminal database, but he managed to evade capture. For Javier's family, the only option was to continue seeking justice and waiting. They believed strongly that he would eventually slip up again. When he did, they were confident that the law would catch up with him. Law enforcement's initial efforts to catch Andres were unsuccessful. They found his abandoned car on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was missing, indicating he had carefully planned his escape. Phone records revealed that, just hours before disappearing, he had contacted several people already under investigation for criminal activities, suggesting he used these connections to vanish. Eventually, investigators confirmed that Andres had illegally fled Chile into Bolivia. He avoided official crossings by using lesser-known smuggling routes favored by traffickers. After crossing the border, he adopted a new identity. For months, he successfully evaded capture, fully aware that authorities were searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javier's family refused to lose hope. Gladys tirelessly worked to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres appeared on international wanted lists. The family engaged with the media, raised awareness on social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo, hoping that someone would recognize him and notify the authorities. The turning point in the investigation came when a reward was offered for information that would lead to Andres's capture. The family pledged a generous sum to anyone who could provide credible information about his location. This approach proved effective, as tips began to emerge. By late 2023, reports indicated that Andres had been seen in a Bolivian city, living a secluded life and avoiding attention while keeping limited contact with locals. Bolivian authorities started monitoring his movements. They learned, through informants, that he was using a false identity, taking odd jobs, and avoiding any official documents that might reveal who he really was. However, he could not remain hidden forever. In January 2024, a local resident reported his exact location to the police. Authorities responded quickly, initiating a targeted operation to capture him. They surrounded the building where Andres was hiding. The operation was quick and efficient. He complied with their commands and was apprehended without resistance. During his arrest, he remained calm, seemingly resigned to his situation. This time, there was no way to escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. After confirming his arrest, Bolivian authorities began the process of extraditing Andres back to Chile. Within days, he was returned to face trial, allowing Javier's family to see the person responsible for their daughter's death held accountable. However, this was just the start of a long battle for them, as they were determined to push for the harshest possible sentence. Once in Chile, Andres was placed in a detention facility, marking a new phase in the investigation. With the main suspect in custody, authorities had a chance to uncover the answers they had sought for over a year and a half. Initially, he refused to cooperate, denying any involvement in Javier's disappearance. However, investigators were ready, armed with evidence linking him to the crime. As the pressure increased, he eventually admitted. His confession lacked any sign of remorse or justification, delivered as if stating a simple fact. He neither portrayed himself as a victim nor showed any regret, maintaining a disturbingly calm demeanor as he spoke. The information he provided directly contradicted his earlier statements. He confessed that he hadn't originally intended to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile and ended their relationship for good, he made a choice he never planned to take back. He tricked her by claiming he had found her lost dog. Trusting him and unaware of what was about to happen, she agreed to meet him. He stated that the crime occurred late at night on a deserted highway. He stopped under the false pretense of looking for a missed suitcase that he claimed had fallen from the trunk. When Javier got out of the truck, he struck her with a fatal blow. Afterwards, he drove further into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body, thinking that the harsh environment would eliminate all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators began searching for the burial site using the coordinates given by Andres. In mid-January 2024, they found human remains in a shallow grave covered with sand. Now, forensic specialists begin the identification process. A few days later, forensic tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Javiera Jimenez. Although the search had ended, the fight for justice was just beginning. His family urged the court to impose the harshest sentence possible on Andres. After his confession, the case was brought to court. There was no doubt about his guilt. His own words, along with the evidence and the discovery of Javier's body, made that clear. It was now the court's responsibility to decide his punishment. Javier's family insists on the harshest penalty, life in prison without parole. They were convinced that he posed a threat to society. For Javiera's mother, true justice guaranteed Andres will never have the chance to re-offend. The prosecution presented all relevant evidence in court, with experts confirming that the crime was premeditated. They highlighted the misleading invitation, the choice to take her to a remote area, and the complete absence of any effort to help her, all of which indicated a well-planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claims of accidental harm. Nevertheless, the defense sought a lighter sentence, arguing that their client had confessed, volunteered, and aided in locating the remains, which they claimed to have cooperated with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this argument, which angered Javier's family. They believed it was clear that Andres' confession was not out of remorse. He only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. He felt no guilt and was merely trying to lessen his sentence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which Gladys participated every session, watching everything unfold. Although she remains composed, her determination was evident in her eyes. Furthermore, in a similar fashion to the disappearance of Javiera Jimenez in August 2022, Andres is also being investigated for being a member of a violent armed gang that steals copper while it is being transported on FCAB trains. Similar crimes were committed by other members of the gang, and the prosecution was able to establish Andres Sutter's involvement through photographs, text messages, and statements from other criminals. In both cases, the court set different investigation dates. For the murder, he was sentenced to 90 days, and for the armed robbery and the copper cathode theft, he was sentenced to 60 days. In addition, Andres remains in custody awaiting trial. Danger can sometimes be much closer than we think. Today's story will tell you how even the most ordinary events can turn into a real nightmare for someone. Cheese in a mousetrap can be either free but, on the contrary, too expensive. In any case, before accepting such gifts of fate, you should be careful about who gives them and whether it will cost you your life. The city of New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, was full of dark stories, including slavery and torture. Despite the fact that we seem to live in a civilized world, echoes of horrific events are still heard in New Orleans, occasionally adding to the town's ominous reputation. Today's story took place in this mysterious place. Jaron Lockhart was born on February 28, 1989. She had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. The Lockharts were not happy. Their parents had no formal education, which made employment and earnings difficult. They constantly suffered from financial hardships and struggled even to feed their large household. From an early age, their children faced poverty. They could not afford anything. After nearly a decade of such a life, the family caught the attention of Child Protective Services. It seemed that this could help change their situation for the better, but in reality, the mother managed to retain her rights to her children. Unfortunately, life for their children did not improve. They continued to live in dire need. Naturally, the struggle for survival was unsatisfactory for them, but they had little choice. Against this backdrop, from a very early age, Jaron sought ways to start earning money. She was determined and wanted to take her salvation from the margins into her own hands. She succeeded. At the age of 18, she found a small apartment on the outskirts that she could afford while working part-time. Despite still being a teenager, Jaron began to solve adult problems. She got a job and started to provide for herself, managing this even better than her parents. While she still faced typical teenage challenges, she did not want to drop out of school. She aimed to earn her diploma, then go to college, obtain a higher education, and continue building a career. She was particularly interested in the beauty industry. Jaron's schedule was very busy, but she found time for her creative aspirations. She enjoyed drawing, poetry, and literature. She also wrote poems as a way of self-expression. This creativity helped her cope with the surrounding reality, and she was known for her bright personality. Jaron had a knack for emphasizing her style through clothing and makeup, especially in creating vibrant looks. By the age of 18, Jaron met a guy named Jeremy Foster. According to her, it was love at first sight. They began a relationship that developed over several years. Those who were well acquainted with them described them as a sincere couple with a promising future. They were very active, positive, and complemented each other well. When Jaron found out that she was pregnant and expecting a girl, she had already chosen the name Riley and Lockhart. She was thrilled at the chance to become a mother, having always dreamed of a large family. However, during this time, fears related to her past re-emerged. She worried that she wouldn't be able to provide for her child, create financial stability, or can't prevent her child from experiencing the same beggarly existence that she had known. Jaren was not accustomed to relying on others, so she didn't allow Jeremy to take care of all the financial matters. Memories of her difficult childhood weighed heavily on her, leading to constant tension. While pregnant, she resolved to secure a better future for herself and her child. Jaren planned to obtain her cosmetology diploma in 2012. She successfully completed the program and acquired a license to practice privately. Unfortunately, the niche was overcrowded, so breaking through to a noticeable level required hard work, but this did not scare her. At that time, she worked as a bartender at a nearby club, and in her free time, she started getting some beauty orders. As an employee of the establishment, she mainly relied on tips. However, this was not a stable enough source of income. When Jaren didn't earn enough, she usually had the option to make extra money by dancing at another club in the evenings. She frequently worked part-time as a dancer, a situation that persisted until the changes associated with her pregnancy became apparent. Finally, Riley was born, and Jaren's activities in cosmetology stalled. At first, it was difficult for her to devote time to her development. She had not a single free minute, everything was spent on Jeremy and Riley. During this period, Jaren wanted to find stability, even considered moving to a motel with her boyfriend and baby to reduce rent expenses and pay the bills. And quickly got herself back in shape to found herself at the pool again. In fact, she did not enjoy this activity but felt forced to do it to avoid financial problems, which still frightened her. Despite the negativity, dancing helped. She rarely faced difficulties. She could provide for herself and her child, paying for housing without needing help from her parents. She often had to dance at night. This repetitive cycle continued until June 6, 2012. It was a Wednesday. Jaren was getting ready for another extra job. Months earlier, she had been unable to pay the full rent, resulting in arrears. As fate would have it, she didn't have time to cover them before the next payment was due. After working a day at the bar, she decided to go dancing that evening. Jaren was preparing for work by 7 p.m., and her shift ended around 2 a.m. Usually, on such nights, she would return home quietly, go to bed so as not to wake Jeremy and her daughter. However, that day was different. On the morning of June 7th, when Jeremy woke up, he immediately noticed that his partner was not nearby. He began to worry, as this was unusual for Jaren. He tried to call her mobile phone but was alarmed to find it turned off. This increased his anxiety, prompting him to call all his friends, relatives, and acquaintances whose numbers he knew. He reached out for help. The men went together to the club where Jaren had been dancing the night before. However, due to club regulations, the administration was prohibited from disclosing information about their employees. This confidentiality, meant to protect the dancers, cruelly hindered the family from discovering whether she had been at work that night. Ultimately, they contacted the local sheriff's department. Unfortunately, the police response was sluggish, and active measures were only taken the next day. Even then, it was of little help, as no information about Jaren emerged in the following days. The police worked with a lack of enthusiasm, knowing that a striptease dancer had gone missing, which they equated to that of a call girl. It was difficult to convince them that she was a young mother and a decent woman. Around 5:30 p.m. on June 8, the children were walking on one of the beaches of the Gulf of Mexico, Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, during low tide. Part of the coast was exposed, and the teenagers spotted a suspicious object at the very edge of the water. When they approached and looked closer, they realized with horror that it was a human torso. The children ran away from the scene and informed the adults, who immediately called the police. Officers found part of a woman's body on the beach, leading to immediate difficulties with identification. However, tattoos and piercings were visible, which should have simplified the process. Unfortunately, at first, no connection was made between the discovered body and Jaren's disappearance. After several days of comparisons, law enforcement finally paid attention to Jaren's disappearance report. Her bright appearance stood out from the others. The tattoos found on the body matched the descriptions provided by Jaren's relatives, who affirmed that they resembled those Jaren had. Despite no documents being found nearby, the police began reviewing all reports of missing persons in the area. When they contacted the Lockhart family, the police took detailed descriptions of Jaren's piercings, tattoos, even small scars and birthmarks. However, due to the long stay in the water, the paint had faded and spread significantly, and this method did not provide a 100% probability of identification. It was decided to conduct DNA testing, which allowed for the identification of the victim as a close relative of the Lockhart family. In the following days, several items of clothing washed up on the coast that relatives recognized as belonging to Jaren. Now, there were questions about the classification of the incident and efforts to establish the exact cause of death. Due to the absence of all body parts, this task proved to be impossible. The forensic expert analyzed the available remains and assumed that the girl died because of a deep cut on her chest, which resembled a knife wound. At the same time, the circumstances of her death remained unclear. One theory proposed that she could have drowned and then ended up under the propellers of a ship passing by. Overall, the police persistently tried to connect the death with water and classify it as an accident to quickly close the case. Fortunately, pressure from relatives prevented the investigation from being stalled. To fully state the cause of death and the circumstances surrounding it, it was necessary to find all body parts. Later, 2 legs and the head were found on the coast. Presumably, the body had been dismembered to make identification difficult. This opinion was confirmed after investigators discovered that areas of skin on the body, where tattoos had also been removed. The forensic expert was unable to find any foreign DNA samples. All traces of the crime had naturally been washed away by the water. A toxicological examination showed the presence of a small amount of alcohol in the blood. However, the concentration was insufficient to cause her death. That's where the information ended. No matter how thoroughly they searched the coast, no other remains could be found. Law enforcement officers continued the investigation in hopes of obtaining more information and finally decided to reconstruct the last day of Jaren's life. They focused on the evening when she went to the club for her next work shift. Her relatives provided a detailed account of her movements up until she left for work. They reported that what happened afterward remained a mystery, as the club administration refused to provide any information regarding Jaren. It was unclear whether she had even shown up that night. When the police arrived at the club, they were met with the same cold reception as the Lockhart family, possibly even worse, because such establishments traditionally do not welcome the attention of the authorities. This could significantly complicate their task. However, at the request of the police and with a warrant in hand, the administration eventually provided information as well as access to video surveillance recordings. It was determined that Jaren did indeed arrive for her shift at around 7 p.m. and, as usual, she worked the evening without any incidents, leaving at approximately 2 a.m. There was nothing unusual in her behavior, except for one small detail. That night, she left the club not alone. The video revealed that Jaren was accompanied by a young athletic man and a woman. When the police contacted the club employees and administration again, no one could definitively identify the individuals seen in the video surveillance recording, or perhaps they simply didn't know them. The dancers also failed to provide any valuable information. In fact, some refused to talk to the police over the weekend, leaving the possibility for further assistance open. The police had no choice but to print out photographs of the individuals who accompanied Jaren. These 2 were probably the last ones to see her alive and might have known something or been involved in her death. Unfortunately, the photos did not clearly show the faces of the individuals. However, they did give an idea of what the probable criminals were wearing. It was also possible to note what Jaren had with them, which provided valuable clues. Still, the lack of names and an approximate direction for the search was complicated by the fact that, similar to other cases, a gang of killers specializing in strippers was operating in the city. Some dancers were even afraid to go to work. Detectives continued to question the girls in the hope that at least someone would recognize the couple in the photo. Investigators decided to take advantage of the excitement among the strippers to encourage them to talk, but they genuinely had no information. Finally, on one day, detectives met with one of the dancers who had also worked at the club on the night of Jaren's disappearance. She remembered the couple from the photo, as both had approached her that evening. The young man offered her the opportunity to take part in a private party being organized at a house outside the city for a tidy sum. He said that there would be a bachelor party at a friend's house and that they needed a dancer for the whole evening. It sounded legitimate. People often approached the club with similar offers. However, this time, everyone they approached rejected the offers for work, particularly since they were offering a substantial amount of money, which was unusual even for a whole night of dancing. Of course, the club employees assumed that they wanted something more than just dancing on the pole, but the couple rejected these assumptions. Regardless, none of the dancers agreed to take the offer. Despite the detailed description and additional information, none of the girls had more precise data to identify the suspicious couple. The investigation was at a standstill. Finally, another girl, also a club worker, went to the police station and identified the individuals in the photo as 40-year-old Terry Speaks and his 28-year-old wife, Margaret Sanchez. The police immediately found their addresses and detained them. While the suspects spoke to the investigators, the police began questioning their neighbors. The man living across the street provided valuable clues to the investigation. He reported that the morning after Jaren's disappearance, he had seen Terry leaving the house with several large black bags. The witness noted that it was obvious Terry was struggling, despite being a strong man. He refused the neighbor's offer of help, but that was not what alarmed the neighbor. He noted that the bags had a suspicious smell. As Terry walked past, a strong odor of cleaning products hit his nose, which seemed alarming. When asked what was in the bags, Terry rudely refused to explain and continued loading them into his car. Detectives quickly discovered that Margaret was a rather strange woman with specific aesthetic tastes. She dressed extravagantly, which seemed unusual. She was attractive, athletic, yet her behavior did not align with her appearance. While communicating, she seemed somewhat socially awkward and often avoided contact with others. Sometimes, she would even shy away from someone who simply said hello or wished her a good day. When acquaintances of they were asked about Terry, they provided even more alarming information, with most considering him to be genuinely dangerous due to his past outbursts of aggression. Immediately, locals informed the police that they had heard Terry was wanted for indecent liberties. This information seemed odd because, although several people knew about it, no one had contacted the police to report him. When Terry was checked in the database, it turned out he was indeed wanted in North Carolina for a series of violent crimes, the most serious of which involved the assault of a minor. He argued in court that it was consensual but claimed the victim later changed her story out of spite. The victim insisted that Terry had threatened to kill her if she resisted. In the end, he received a short sentence for assault but was quickly released. Now, he was on probation, which he repeatedly violated, prompting him to flee to another state to avoid incarceration. While analyzing the personalities of Terry and Margaret, the police learned that Margaret worked as a dancer in several clubs, including the one where Jaren worked. On June 6, both Jaren and Margaret were scheduled for the night shift, and her husband came in as a client. Terry and Margaret had been inseparable since they met in 2009. As it turned out, she and Jaren occasionally crossed paths at the club, eventually becoming colleagues and friends. At that point, the police aimed to investigate whether Margaret could lure Jaren into a trap. The most valuable clue the police had at that time was information about Terry's car, in which he loaded the suspicious bags before driving away. The police were able to track his movements using video cameras and managed to record him at several locations around the city. They identified several spots where Terry disposed of suspicious bags, leading them to conclude that he was likely scattering the remains of his victim to make it harder to find her. This premise was the most plausible assumption made by the investigators. This information was sufficient to detain both suspects until the circumstances were clarified, and they were held in custody since Terry posed a high flight risk. Unfortunately, their arrest was not enough to prompt the suspects to talk. They stubbornly remained silent. However, the police had another trump card, a warrant to search their home. Margaret and Terry were detained fairly quickly, generating hope that they couldn't manage to destroy the evidence. This was crucial since all the evidence detectives currently had was circumstantial. Fortunately, a real jackpot awaited the police at Terry and Margaret's house. There were hundreds of emails on their computers, in which they discussed in detail the events of that fateful night. It all started with a discussion of the murder and ended with the spouses literally threatening each other, apparently both afraid and mistrustful of one another, fearing that the other would set them up. Ultimately, it was this correspondence that implicated them the most. The detectives decided to employ a trick. They wanted to show Margaret and Terry's letters separately, without revealing that everything had already been read, as if they were looking at the phones for the first time. It was worth opening the messenger in front of Terry and Margaret, as they began to accuse each other. This was the main goal of the police. The investigators executed this trick well, and it was evident that the primary suspects were indeed detained correctly. However, the situation changed little as it was impossible to obtain a confession. Margaret and Terry simply shifted responsibility onto one another, leaving the motive for the massacre unclear. Nonetheless, it was likely an abuse assault since Terry and Margaret initially wanted to convince several other girls to join them at a mansion outside the city, indicating that the specific victim may not have been important to them. This hints at the fact that the $1,000 offered for the bachelor party could have resolved urgent financial issues that Jaron was desperately trying to address. Probably, this was a decisive factor in agreeing to go to the party. Additionally, Margaret could have persuaded Jaron, as she was someone Jaron trusted. When Jaron ended up in Terry's house, it seems he wanted more than just a dance. A conflict arose between them that led to death. Continuing to investigate the flow of information, the police confirmed that no bachelor party. This was an obvious lie. Judging by the correspondence of Margaret and Terry, this attack had been planned for several months. It turned out that at the end of May, they began plotting a bloody massacre and even visited the locations where Terry later disposed of the bags containing remains. They scouted the area, taking pictures that were later deleted. Nevertheless, the police managed to restore and reveal the bloody plan of this deranged couple. Direct evidence of Margaret's involvement in the murder was not found within the house. However, a metal container was discovered in which something had obviously been burned recently. The police examined the area but were unable to recover the contents, as the investigation believed the criminals had disposed of some evidence and simply did not have time to get rid of the rest. However, even the correspondence was enough for the jury, as the few messages very eloquently described what had happened. In 2015, Terry was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for premeditated murder, concealing evidence of a crime, and desecrating remains. The situation with his wife turned out to be more complicated. However, a decision was made that resulted in Margaret Sanchez receiving a 40-year sentence for obstruction of justice and another 40 years for manslaughter. The sentences would be served consecutively, amounting to 80 years. Margaret and Terry never confessed during the trial. They showed no remorse or regret. Margaret refused to provide any comments to justify her actions or explain her motives. Consequently, it was not possible to accurately reconstruct the chronology of events. In narrow circles of popular theories, there were rumors about Margaret and Terry's involvement in the occult, their planning of ritual murders in a satanic style. They allegedly planned to kill several girls. Fortunately, they were stopped and can no longer harm anyone. In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jessie and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jessie and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and call for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. she was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, He gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye and secretly follows her to a deserted street where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured.
She was only 9 years old, and what the police discovered in that bathroom was unforgettable. It all started when a taxi driver in Lima overheard an alarming conversation. This led the police to a small apartment in San Miguel. Although everything appeared calm inside, a closed door concealed a shocking discovery. Neighbors reported not hearing anything unusual. No screams or cries, but something terrible had occurred, and someone was concealing the truth. This is the heartbreaking story of Pierina Nicole, a little girl who did not receive the protection she deserved. Pierina Nicole was born in 2002 in Piura, a city in northwestern Peru. Her early life was significantly influenced by her mother's difficult past. Isabel Mirella Tello Chanduvi. Isabel faced a troubled childhood, having been abused by a doctor when she was just 13 years old. This traumatic event sparked a lifelong rebellion and resentment in Isabel, especially towards her parents. As an adult, Isabel had 5 children with 4 different fathers, and one of them was Pierina. Due to the instability in Isabel's life, she gave Pierina to a family friend just 1 week after the baby was born, saying she couldn't take care of her. In this new home, Pierina was lovingly embraced. Without any other small children around, she quickly became the center of the family, bringing joy and warmth to the household. Isabel continued to support Pierina financially and visited often. Alfredo Cardosa Curay, Pierina's father, remained the important figure in her life, even after he separated from Isabel and began a new family. His relationship with Pierina stayed strong. He visited her regularly and prioritized her well-being. During her early years, Pierina flourished under the care of the woman who welcomed her into her home. She received lots of love and lived in a calm environment. Pierina, known for her gentle personality and kind nature, quickly endeared herself to her neighbors. When Pierina turned 3, Isabel decided to move to Lima. From then on, she only visited her daughter once a month. As a result, the bond between mother and daughter grew weaker. During this time, Pierina's maternal grandmother, Bertha Chanduvi Garcia, became more involved in her life. However, Bertha was viewed unfavorably by some neighbors, who labeled her as an alcoholic living a troubled life. These opinions reached Pierina's caregiver. She acknowledged that even though Bertha lived nearby, they never became close. Ultimately, the responsibility for taking care of Pierina shifted more directly to her biological mother and grandmother. At first, it might have looked like a long-awaited family reunion, with a child reconnecting with her blood relative. However, the situation was much more painful. Isabel was known for her unpredictable behavior and didn't have the patience required for raising children. Her mood swings made her parenting unreliable. While she occasionally met her responsibilities, she frequently neglected them, both in daily care and in making sure her daughter went to school. At first, the abuse Pierina experienced was verbal, consisting of insults and harsh criticism. Being very young, she didn't fully understand how damaging her home life had become. Despite the hostile atmosphere, she remained kind, obedient, and loving. Alfredo tried to stay involved, but his interactions with Isabel often ended in arguments that were noticeable to their neighbors. Over time, he became increasingly aware of the mistreatment Pierina was facing, and his concern deepened. Eventually, it became clear that Isabel's verbal abuse had escalated into physical violence. With Pierina being punished severely for minor mistakes, Pierina started to feel responsible for her troubled relationship with her mother. Once, she even wrote Isabel a heartfelt letter for Mother's Day, expressing her love and asking for forgiveness for her supposed misbehavior. Unfortunately, this gesture did not change Isabel's behavior. Instead, the situation worsened. Shortly afterward, Pierina reported her mother to the police, claiming that Isabel had hit her in the head with a brick and physically assaulted her. However, her complaint did not lead to any meaningful help or intervention. Pierina's suffering continued largely unnoticed. She endured constant beatings and psychological torment. Isabel rarely took her to school, further isolating her from potential support systems. The other children in the home, Pierina's younger siblings, also suffered. Isabel had developed a cruel habit of punishing them while they were naked in the bathroom, covering their mouths with clothing to muffle their cries and avoid drawing the attention of neighbors. Realizing the severity of the situation, Alfredo started legal proceedings to gain custody of Pierina. However, the bureaucratic process was slow, and conditions in Isabel's home deteriorated further. Even Bertha could no longer ignore the problem. In April 2009, she took the shocking step of reporting her own daughter to the authorities for abusing Pierina. As a result of these serious allegations, the authorities stripped Isabel of her custody rights and temporarily placed Pierina in the care of Bertha, her maternal grandmother. While this change appeared to offer a fresh start for Pierina, her circumstances did not improve. For reasons that remain unclear, Bertha did not fulfill her responsibilities as a caretaker. Neglecting to prioritize Pierina's education and well-being, Pierina began to miss school frequently, and her absences grew so common that neither her teachers nor classmates found them surprising. In 2010, a formal evaluation revealed that Pierina required the support of a dedicated adult. The evaluation warned that if she remained in her grandmother's care, she could completely disengage from the education system. Most concerning was the report's claim that Bertha might pose an even greater risk to Pierina than Isabel had. One school report indicated that from March to December 2007, Pierina's attendance was inconsistent, with no explanation provided. Another report from the following year revealed that she missed over 30% of her classes without justification. A third report from 2009 showed she attended only 35 school days. A fourth report from 2010 suggested that her academic performance could improve if her attendance issues were addressed. Upon receiving this information, Alfredo took immediate action. He filed an urgent legal request for custody and included several documents to support his case. Based on these findings, the social worker responsible for the case submitted a detailed report recommending that Pierina be placed in her father's custody. Despite the challenges she faced, Pierina remained lively, playful, social, and cheerful. However, her emotional pain was becoming apparent. She often felt sad and shared her experiences of abuse with her teacher. At that time, Alfredo was living with his wife, and the social worker confirmed that their home environment was stable. Alfredo had always fulfilled his financial and emotional responsibilities, was dedicated to providing a better life for his daughter. His efforts began to pay off when the court granted him provisional custody, but he still needed to start legal action against Bertha to obtain full custody. On June 15, 2011, Alfredo officially filed for custody of his child. During the reconciliation hearing, Bertha refused to hand over the child. This led to several weeks of legal disputes, but Alfredo remained determined. He passed 3 psychological evaluations and welcomed numerous home visits from social services. In contrast, Bertha did not show up for her evaluations and failed to bring Pierina, which raised serious concerns. In August of that year, Isabel took her daughter and relocated to Lima after Bertha made an unexpected decision to return the girl to her mother. Isabel and Pierina moved into an apartment in the San Miguel district. At 31, Isabel began dating Jonathan Nieto. She had met at a nightclub, where he claims they first crossed paths during her involvement in escort. Their relationship quickly became tumultuous and violent. Jonathan frequently stayed at the apartment, which exposed Pierina to their escalating fights, often resulting in physical altercations. Meanwhile, on November 3rd, the family court decided to skip the postponed psychological evaluations for Bertha and speed up the custody process in favor of Alfredo. They sent the case to the public prosecutor for a final decision. Before a final decision could be reached, Pierina's ordeal ended in a devastating way. Less than 2 weeks later, on November 14, 2011, a taxi driver in Lima picked up 2 women, one younger and one slightly older. What seemed like a normal ride quickly turned unsettling. During the trip, the 2 women started arguing, and the driver noticed their discussion was concerning how to create an alibi for a recent crime involving a young girl. When the taxi driver dropped them off at their destination, he quickly went to the nearest police station and reported the incident. The police took his report seriously and sent officers to the address the women provided. What they discovered confirmed the driver's worst fears. The police encountered a shocking scene inside the apartment. In the bathroom, they discovered a young girl named Pierina, just 9 years old, lying naked on the cold floor and unresponsive. Her body was marked by severe bruises, and her face had noticeable red blotches. While her mother denied any involvement in Pierina's death, neighbors quickly spoke up, revealing that Isabel had a long history of mistreating her daughter. Many were concerned that something tragic would eventually occur. Within hours of discovering Pierina's body and transporting it to the morgue, Isabel and her boyfriend Jonathan were arrested as the main suspects in the violent murder. The interrogation that followed was lengthy and intense, with Isabel insisting she was innocent. She recounted that on the night of the incident, Jonathan returned home drunk and had scratches on his neck, which sparked a heated argument between them. According to Isabel, after hours of fighting and yelling, Jonathan left the apartment around 6. It was at this point that she revealed she had taken out her anger, not on him, but on her daughter. She claimed to have forcibly removed Pierina from her bed, stripped her of her clothes, shaved her head, and made her take a shower. Afterward, she said she allowed Pierina to return to her room to rest. In her inconsistent account, Isabel tried to blame Jonathan first and then even accused her neighbors. But detectives did not find her credible. Her numerous contradictions and her cold, emotionless behavior shocked even the most seasoned officers. When the news of Pierina's death reached her caregiver, the shock was immense. As the reality sank in, it became clear to everyone that Isabel was to blame. Alfredo, Pierina's father, hurried to Lima as soon as he received the news. Heartbroken, he went directly to the central morgue to claim his daughter's body. Meanwhile, investigators spoke with several neighbors who confirmed Isabel's story about her activities that day. She left around midday and returned a few hours later. None of the neighbors remembered hearing Pierina cry or scream, which added to the eerie atmosphere. Along with the troubling account from the taxi driver and growing discrepancies in Isabel's statements, the judge had very few doubts about the situation. Isabel was officially charged with the murder of her daughter and taken into pretrial custody as the investigation continued. When she was brought to court, a crowd gathered outside, shouting insults at her. Reporters tried to get a comment. The truth was already becoming clear. Forensic evidence and statements from officials revealed a disturbing timeline of events. On that tragic day, Isabel violently attacked her daughter in the shower, covering Piarina's mouth to muffle her cries. This was corroborated by faint marks around Piarina's lips, suggesting smothering. During the assault, Piarina lost consciousness, and Isabel, thinking her daughter was dead, left her lying motionless. The autopsy revealed signs of abuse, leading investigators to believe there was an attempt to stage the scene to implicate someone else in the crime. Forensic experts concluded that the cause of death was suffocation due to obstruction of the airway. Detectives believed Isabel's midday trip outside was a deliberate effort to create an alibi. Jonathan was cleared of any suspicion, as it was shown he was not in the apartment when the injuries occurred. There was confusion in the media regarding the identity of the woman who accompanied Isabel in the taxi. Some reports named her Bertha, while others called her Angela. Regardless, investigators confirmed that neither woman was involved in Piarina's death. Days later, Piarina's body was brought to Piura. Her father, Alfredo, carried her casket through the streets to her paternal grandmother's home, where a private wake was held, closed to the media. That afternoon at 3:30 p.m., a small funeral service took place. The brutality of Piarina's death shocked the entire nation. Beyond the horrifying crime, the case revealed significant failures in the systems designed to protect children. Many questioned, how could such a tragedy occur under the supervision of social services, and the court's outrage grew among the public. Critics pointed fingers at Bertha, who had legal custody of Piarina, but ultimately returned her to Isabel. Others criticized the family court for dismissing the social worker's urgent recommendation to place Piarina with her father. Alfredo's family announced that they would file formal complaints against Bertha and the judicial officials involved. Piarina's two younger siblings were placed in a child welfare facility where they were to undergo psychological evaluations with their extended family. Eventually, the children were transferred to the National Family Welfare Program. Later that November, Bertha sold her house and moved to Lima, reportedly hoping to distance herself from the events that had occurred. As the legal process progressed, Jonathan chose to speak publicly about his experience. In an interview, he described Isabel as a highly violent person who would use anything available like broomsticks and knives to attack him, and possibly others. He also shared a shocking detail. Isabel had convinced him that her children were not actually hers, but were the offspring of a mentally unstable sister who roamed the streets. Jonathan revealed another alarming detail that highlighted the terrible conditions Piarina had faced for years. He said that the little girl didn't have any toys at all. Even more troubling, she had to sleep on the floor, lacking both love and the basic comforts that every child deserves. A year and a half after the crime, the trial against Isabel began in March 2013. During the proceedings, several important witnesses testified, including Bertha, Jonathan, Alfredo, and several of Isabel's former partners. They all described Isabel as unfit to be a mother, depicting her as violent, erratic, and emotionally unstable. Their testimonies indicated that she had abused not just Piarina, but all of her children. Isabel tried to explain her version of events regarding Piarina's death. During her testimony, she became emotional and repeated that she was innocent. Despite her claims, the evidence and witness statements were too strong to ignore. The court convicted her, and the prosecutors asked for the maximum punishment under Peruvian law, which is a life in prison. They also requested about $10,000 in civil compensation for Piarina's family. On November 7, 2013, Isabel was sentenced to life in prison. During the final hearing, the court presented results from a psychological evaluation carried out during the investigation. The report indicated that Isabel displayed psychopathic traits, calculated behavior, a concerning lack of empathy, and a total disregard for the emotional pain of others. She was characterized as someone skilled in manipulation, especially towards those she viewed as vulnerable. Her defense team filed an appeal, but the higher court rejected it and maintained the original ruling. The only change is that the sentence will be reviewed after 35 years in 2046. Bertha continued to attribute her daughter's actions to her own difficult history. However, there is no evidence that she faced any legal repercussions for her involvement in the circumstances surrounding Purina's death, even though she was once the legal guardian. With all the information now revealed, the case of Purina Nicole stands out as a tragic example of systemic failure. The brutal murder of Purina Nicole, a 9-year-old girl radiant with kindness and resilience, stands as a heart-wrenching testament to the unimaginable horror of a child abused and killed by her own biological mother. Isabel Mirella Tello Shandovi, Purina's life, filled with love from her father and caregiver, yet shattered by her mother's relentless verbal and physical violence, ended in a tragedy that devastated Peru. Isabel's conviction brings a semblance of justice, but it cannot undo the pain of a daughter betrayed by the one meant to protect her, nor the failures of social services and courts that ignored glaring warning signs. Purina's story is a searing call for urgent reform to ensure no child suffers such betrayal and neglect again. As Alfredo and countless others carry her memory forward, Purina's legacy must drive a fierce commitment to protect every child's right to safety, love, and a future free from harm.
The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the lengths someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flavia Godinho Mafra was born on April 19, 1996, in São João Batista, a peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Canalinha. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flavia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flavia met Valdeli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flavia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news: they were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rosalba Maria Grime was born in 1994 in Canalinha, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rosalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married Zulmir Schiestel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rosalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zulmir simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rosalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers. Overcome with happiness, Rosalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rosalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flavia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rosalba and Flavia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rosalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rosalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flavia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rosalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rosalba had also connected with 2 other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rosalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rosalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rosalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zomir was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been canceled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rosalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors, Zomir wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rosalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rosalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. However, it was always Rosalba who took the initiative. Flavia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rosalba would play on Flavia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rosalba was closely watching Flavia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba imitated Flavia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flavia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rosalba. By mid-July, Rosalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rosalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flavia to honor Flavia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flavia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rosalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flavia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flavia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27, 2020. Rosalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rosalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flavia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up Flavia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flavia was oblivious to their destination. Rosalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flavia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flavia hesitated but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light to help Flavia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canalinha's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flavia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rosalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flavia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rosalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rosalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rosalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rosalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flavia was still alive, Rosalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flavia. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rosalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rosalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rush trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rosalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators. Both internally and externally, everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rosalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zolmir, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rosalba called Zolmir, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zolmir inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flavia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September, they realized the baby seemed to be hers but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained: where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zolmir could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rosalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rosalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rosalba's own phone. After laying out all the facts, Zolmir broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend the baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rosalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rosalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured. Shocked and terrified, he quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rosalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rosalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rosalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rosalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby, without considering the consequences of her actions. Rosalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants. In hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, she later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rosalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zolmir, Rosalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São João Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flavia Godinho Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São João Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flavia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rosalba Maria Grimes' calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life.